The night before an exam can be super stressful. And I know, you know, there's nothing relaxing about cramming, about last minute studying, and about trying to memorize everything a few hours before you're going to be tested on it. But here's the thing. Top students do not do this. They do not cram the night before an exam. So if you came here looking for last minute Hail Marys about how to hyper memorize an entire unit's worth of content a few hours before your test, guess what? You're in the wrong spot. Because, hold up though, don't leave yet. Top students don't cram the night before a test because they spend the night before a test reviewing, not studying, not learning, but reviewing the material that they've been studying along the way, right? But in this video, I'm gonna share 8 tips for what to do the night before an exam. They're gonna help you feel calm, confident, and ready to kill it. So let's dive in. Hi, I'm Katie Azevedo of schoolhabits.com. I've been a teacher for nearly 20 years. I have a master's degree in special education, and I have helped thousands of students learn and work smarter. And yes, part of learning and working smarter involves having a study routine or a system that you follow without fail on the days leading up to a test so that you don't end up in these epic all-nighter kind of situations. I know what they feel like because I have been in many of those myself. Hey, listen, before I came up with all this advice, okay, I didn't have this advice, all right? So I have been in your shoes. Now, before we get into the 8 tips, I need to emphasize something very critical. You must start preparing for your tests at least 5 to 10 days in advance. I know that's not what you want to hear, and I also know that it's not always possible. I have a video called How to Study for a Test You Just Found Out About, because sometimes you're in a situation where it's not your fault and there's like a pop test, or the teacher's like, oh, by the way, next day, right? Or maybe it is your fault and you've been procrastinating, you didn't look at the syllabus, you weren't there for the announcement, whatever the reason, and you have a test in 1 to 2 days. There are some strategies that you can use that kind of function like a Hail Mary. Okay, that's not this video. But to prevent those situations, you've got to start preparing 5 to 10 days in advance. And that's not just, a personal preference of mine. Our brains actually do need a legitimate amount of time that's not opinion-based to change neurologically during the learning process. It's neurological, it's chemical, it's biological. And no matter how much we want to rush the study process and the learning process the night before an exam, we can't do that on a cellular level. Learning takes the amount of time it takes, just like digestion takes the amount of time it takes. Certain body processes take the amount of time they take, regardless of our feelings about them. And we need to understand that learning something, knowledge acquisition, the process of neurologically our brain saying, okay, I'm gonna build some connections here. This new material is related to this material. It's gonna take me some time to send out these neurons to connect to the other neurons, right? That's what's happening under a microscope, okay? So your lack of preparation before a test, or your resistance to this concept that we have to prepare for tests 5 to 10 days in advance, doesn't change that that's the reality. If you've watched any of my videos at this point, you know that the tough love approach is kind of the approach I take. So apologies if that's new to you. All right, but if you are used to the advice that I share here and in my other spaces, then you are already using spaced repetition as a framework to map out your study sessions. You are already using active recall-based study methods. And if that's so, then you're in a really good place. All right, and if spaced repetition and active recall are new to you, then that truly is where you need to start. Then the rest of the tips in this video probably won't land the way that I'm intending them to land for you, because this isn't like a study tips video. I have so many of those, and like I said, many of them I'll link down below, but I'm coming from a place now of we're assuming that you have studied, that you have prepared, and now it is the night before a test, okay? So let's just assume that you have used active recall study techniques, and now what do? We review. So tip number 1 is to start your review late afternoon and early in the evening, and not at nighttime. starting the review process, which is what we're doing the night before test. We're not learning something for the first time, we're reviewing it, okay? But even the review process is gonna take some time. And that's why I'm suggesting to start in the afternoon, so that you're not thinking about the material and buzzing around about it right when you crawl into bed, because then you're gonna have not a good night's sleep, and that is certainly not an optimal thing to do the night before test. All right, so let me give you a strategy to help you figure out when is the ideal time to start your day before the test review. We're going to use something called reverse engineering, which is the concept of working from the end point and working backwards. All right, so let me show you what this would look like. First, decide what time you want to go to bed. Let's just say for our case, 10 p.m. Step 2, we would subtract the time it takes to get ready for bed. Maybe brushing your teeth, showering, whatever you need. This has to be figured out based on what you typically do before bed. Let's say that all of that takes 45 minutes. Okay, so starting back from 10, we are now at 9:15. Then we would subtract about another 20 minutes to prepare for the next morning. I'm actually going to talk about that in a future step. That takes us to 8:55. Next, we would subtract time for dinner and other things that you have in the late afternoon or the evening. So let's say that's 90 minutes or so. Now, what these things are, besides dinner, I don't know, that's up to you. Maybe you have a plan with a friend. Maybe there's other things you do in the evening. Maybe you like to go to the gym, whatever. We're giving ourselves 90 minutes, okay? So now we're at 7:25. Step 5 is to finally subtract the time that you plan to study, which should be anywhere from 30 to 90 minutes. Remember, we are just reviewing at this point. We're not learning new information. That takes us to around 6 p.m. Now, this is the absolute latest that you should start your review. If you start at 6, that's assuming that absolutely nothing at all is going to go wrong in your entire evening. And I don't know about you, but that is not the world I live in. So if you like to unwind or read before bed, you might want to add in some more buffer time and start around 4:30. But even just that simple process of saying, okay, well, what time do I want to go to bed? What are the things that I have going on? Okay, now I know what time to start studying. Having that clarity prevents you from starting studying at 9 o'clock and realizing that, oh my gosh, you haven't showered, you don't even know where your materials are, and now you're in bed at midnight, and that wasn't your intention. Take these 5 minutes up front. It makes all the difference. Tip 2 is to split your study time in half. So instead of one longer study session, let's say 90 minutes, you would have 2 45-minute study sessions the night before a test. Now, when I say study sessions, let's just clarify one more time for the people in the back. It's review sessions. All of the material that you are reviewing, you have seen before. None of it is new. Now, why do I suggest breaking up your study session, review session, whatever. If I say study sessions, you know what I mean, review. Why do I suggest breaking it in half? Because this taps into the power of spaced repetition. Remember, the spaced repetition tutorial is in the description box below. But the gist is the absolute best way to remember material long-term is to learn it thoroughly. And the best way to do that is to come back to the material multiple times over regular intervals. Spaced, right? So you're spacing them out. Repetition, you're coming back to it over and over and over again. And that's why at the top of this video, I suggested that you start studying 5 to 10 days in advance so that you have time to work in those spaced repetition intervals. That in itself is going to get you knowing the content so much more that when you show up for this review the day before the test, it truly, truly is just a review. But this spaced repetition framework can be super helpful the night before a test too. So like I said, maybe if you were planning a 90-minute study session, you would do 2 45-minute study sessions with a 15-minute break in between. And you would factor this in when you're doing your reverse engineering that I walked you through in step 1, right? But that's the whole purpose of this reverse engineering process, is to figure these things out. You could even do a 30-minute study session right after school or in the afternoon, and then another 30-minute study session sometime in the evening. So you can absolutely have a longer break in between. In fact, that would be preferred. Tip number 3, this is a big one. Test yourself under real conditions. Think about it. Tomorrow's test is going to ask you questions and you are not going to have the answers in front of you. So the only way that you will know if you are prepared for that test is if the night before you can answer questions without having the answers in front of you. And that, my friend, is the nature of active recall. Yes, spaced repetition and active recall are the main characters of this video. So some examples of active recall are using practice tests, using flashcards. You can make yourself a mind map. I have a video on how to do that. When you're studying, I'll leave that below. You can use the blurting method. You could fill in blank diagrams if the material that you're studying is about like labeling something like anatomy or geography, right? Have a blank diagram in front of you. Can you label it without looking at your notes? If you can't, well then what do you think you're gonna do tomorrow on the test? For some reason, we always feel weird about testing ourselves before a test because it's scary. We don't want to know if we know it or not. We don't want to be like caught red-handed, like not knowing something, because that feels so crummy. It does, but this is what we do. This is how we study. This is how we review. We want to find those gaps. We want to find those areas that aren't quite there yet. Now, something really important here. I don't know if you caught it. In this step, I'm asking you to test yourself before the test, okay? Using flashcards, using practice quizzes, using, blank diagrams, right? What I'm not suggesting in this step, this is very important, is for you to be making those quizzes and making those flashcards and searching online somewhere for the blank diagrams. That's not what we're doing. That stuff needs to have been handled before now. If you're a student inside my program, School Habits University, then you already recognize this. This is the FOMSO 5-step study framework, yes? Making your study materials is its own entire step by itself. And you can't be doing that the night before an exam when you're supposed to be reviewing. So making your materials is one step, and then studying the materials is another step. Tip number 4, create a reference sheet. As you're reviewing the night before, try to consolidate all of the content into a single sheet of paper, or better yet, this won't work for every scenario, but even just an index card. The more that you can distill and consolidate these larger concepts that you're studying into a single sheet of paper, the better it means that you know it. And this reference sheet that you make can be really helpful the next morning over breakfast when you're reviewing the material one more time, or maybe in the first part of class when your teacher is still handing out the tests or settling everybody, or maybe on your bus ride or commute to school. Also, distilling the information and thinking about this big concept and saying, okay, how can I minimize that? How can I reduce that? How can I simplify that? How can I summarize that? Helps you learn the information better. Because we can't summarize what we don't know. And if you struggle to summarize or paraphrase or reduce a larger concept into something small that can fit on your reference sheet, that means you're not quite there yet, right? You don't quite know that information well enough to be tested on it, which is good. That's not bad news. That just means that that's something that you would want to review a little bit more. Next tip, tip 5, avoid caffeine after 3 p.m. Now, I'm not preaching here, okay? Because you don't see this from this thing, well, double almond milk latte with a double espresso, okay? And I get it. You might be tempted to have that extra cup of coffee or maybe that energy drink because you're like, oh, I have an epic study session tonight. First of all, no more epic study sessions because you prepare for your test 5 to 10 days in advance. And this is your review, okay? But also, caffeine stays in your body for so much longer than we think it does. At least, at a bare minimum, 8 hours. So if we're talking about like an average 11 o'clock bedtime, that's where I came up with the time of a 3 o'clock cutoff point. If you're planning to go to bed around 10, well then your last cup of coffee or whatever, or caffeine, should be 2. Trust me, getting enough sleep the night before a test is so much more beneficial than that extra jolt that you're gonna get from a cup of coffee. Now, speaking of sleep, the next tip, tip 6, is to go to bed at a reasonable hour. Sleep is when your brain processes what it learns. You can spend all the time in the world studying and learning something, but if you don't have a good night's sleep, that process of your brain consolidating all of that material and consolidating your memories, you're gonna wake up and it's gonna be like you didn't even study it. The way this works is that when we're sleeping, our brain, because it's not paying attention to any external stimulation, right? We're not seeing things, we're not hearing things, we're not tasting things, right? All the senses. So it's able to use all its resources to consolidate and form memories into knowledge. It can't do that when we're awake because it's using all of its resources to process incoming stimulation. I'm reducing that entire process, okay, but that's essentially how it happens. So prioritize sleep because your brain needs it to perform at its best the next day. And this is not just my opinion, that is science talking. Tip 7 is all about making your morning stress-free. The less you have to think about the morning of your test, the better you'll do on your test because stress directly impacts your cognitive performance. So the night before, lay out your clothes, pack your bag, plan what you're going to have for breakfast, prepare it if you can. You want to be making as few decisions as possible the day of your test. Also, taking care of these things the night before your exam can help you sleep better because it's one less thing that you're going to be laying in bed thinking about, oh, I gotta pack this can't forget to put this in my bag. All those bananas things that our brain does as we're trying to fall asleep, right? You're going to eliminate that by taking care of it in advance. Finally, tip number 8, leave a piece of paper next to your bed. It is absolutely normal for our brains to attempt to remind us of all of the things that we need to do as we're trying to fall asleep. We can't blame our precious little brains for doing that. It is all related to evolution and survival. It just wants us to survive. And it doesn't know if don't forget to respond to that email has the same level of urgency as don't forget to hunt the buffalo on the prairie tomorrow, right? Evolutionarily speaking, we haven't evolved that much. And so as we lay in bed and all these stressful thoughts come up at us, that's to be expected. But there's some strategies that we can do to reduce the impact of those thoughts on us. And that's why I suggest having a piece of paper next to your bed or a notebook so that as these thoughts arise, you can immediately write them down. When we write these things down, we're giving our brain permission to forget them. Because if we don't write them down, then part of our brain is saying, oh, we don't want to forget this. I'm going to have to remember this all night long and keep it on repeat. But if you write them down, your brain says, okay, I know they're safe. They're on a piece of paper. I can let this go now. And in fact, this is a really good practice that I suggest most people do, not even just the night before an exam. The impact can be huge. By the way, if you're finding these tips helpful, please give the video a like, make sure you're subscribed, leave a comment or a question. All of that helps more than you can ever imagine. So those were the 8 tips that are intended to help you feel prepared and calm and ready to perform your best on an exam. But remember, the most critical way, all right, the most effective way to make sure that you are prepared for an exam is to actually prepare for the exam. Prepare for the exam on multiple days leading up to the test, using spaced repetition, using active recall study strategies so that by the time you get to the night before your test, it's just a review. And you can spend that evening maybe doing a little review, but mostly taking care of your mind. Good luck with your exams. I appreciate you and thank you so much for watching.